Sounds True presents Music is Medicine, Session 3, Voice and Drone, with Gardner.
Now that we've discovered how music touches us physiologically, how it can bring color to mind and scent to mind because these travel on parallel wavelengths with sound, we're ready to begin the healing elements of music. We'll begin this with drone. What is drone? Well, when the wind is blowing outside your window and you hear it going through the trees or playing the telephone wires outside, you'll hear a hum, an uninterrupted, long hum. And if the velocity of the wind isn't too fast, you'll hear a constant tone that doesn't stop for quite some time. That's a drone. We talked earlier about electricity, a constant drone that goes into the walls of our home. So there's this subliminal drone that's constantly happening in our lives. But drones can be used for healing as well. Drones are simply long, uninterrupted sounds. It doesn't matter what instrument is doing it, whether it's the voice or whether it's a musical instrument. It's a long, uninterrupted sound. And just as we experimented at the very beginning, when I play a long note on the flute, such as this, and ask you where you felt it in your body, and then played a contrasting tone such as this, and asked you to notice where it felt different from the first tone, and if it did, drones have the same effect. They touch us in different places. For the most part of my workshops, when I would play the tone called F on the musical scale, most people felt it in the chest area. Whereas if I would play a B flat, most folks would feel it in the head, or a D, they would feel it in the belly. When it comes to breaking down blockages, this can be very handy if you have an instrument that's going to vibrate the body, the mass, the density of the body in a particular place. Playing a long drone on a tone that duplicates the frequency of that mass will help to break down blockages. Earlier, I told you the story of the water in my ear and how driving home I just hummed until I found the pitch or the sound that started the tickling in the ear and then vibrated the bubble of water loose. This, I believe, can happen with more serious blockages, even so much as moving tumors or reducing tumors. If one has the right instrument, droning for a long enough time, and the intent is behind it at the same time, one can visualize these blockages being broken. So let's familiarize ourselves with some of the world instruments that are set up to drone. In almost every world culture, there is a drone instrument, other than the sound of the voices, which can drone quite nicely as well. Starting with the most ancient one of all, and this one is from Australia. This is the Digeridoo. Even though there's a rhythmic element to the sound of this instrument, the basic sound is an uninterrupted single tone or single pitch. And you might be interested to know that this instrument is probably about 4 feet long, and it's the branch of a tree which has been hollowed out by termite-like insects. And then the mouthpiece is formed of beeswax. If you ever played trombone or saw someone who played trombone, the same kind of mouth shape is used to create the sound, but also the player can scream into it or make sounds into it as well. And it's a very powerful drone instrument. It's used in so many healing rituals in Australia. It's found its way into popular music, but its original intent was as a healing instrument. Perhaps you can think of some American instruments that have drones to them. One very indigenous instrument to this country is the banjo. There's 5 strings on the banjo. 4 are tuned to chords, but the 5th one is a drone sound, and it's constant. There's the mountain dulcimer, probably one of the easiest instruments to play, even to build for yourself. And this instrument is basically 1 string that plays the melody and 2 or 3 strings that play a drone beneath it. So these drones are touching us on a physical level and can be used for breaking down blockages. I use the drone in my own compositions as the bed on which all the other musical elements lie. This is the basis of healing music as I see it. So we have some more instruments. The tamboura is a wonderful instrument from India. Kind of looks like a sitar, a big stringed instrument, and it has 4 or more strings, and the sole function of this instrument is to drone. And that is so that the listeners to the musical performance and the musicians can vibrate in sympathy. They can vibrate at the same rate together. And until that drone is sounded, the music and the rhythm doesn't even begin. Here's a little selection from my CD, Drone Zone. You will hear the tamboura at the very beginning, and then a little later you'll hear the flute come in. But notice how the tamboura has this wonderfully nasal sound and gets everything going before the melody even comes in. The flute isn't the important thing to listen to here. It's that drone sound underneath the flute. That is where we start to vibrate in sympathy with the music that's being played at the drone level. By vibrating in sympathy, I mean that we start to entrain or beat in sync with the vibration of the music that's being played. There are several other instruments from India that are used as drones, and this is probably the culture that uses the most drone instruments. Here's another example of an Indian instrument. This is called a shruti box. A shruti box is kind of like an accordion or a concertina that can only play 1 note, and it is used as a drone instrument under a chant by the medieval mystic Hildegard of Bingen. Perhaps if you listen to these for a long enough time, you'll be able to feel the drone. These are just some examples of some of the drone instruments you'll find on recordings that are available today. You might just want to do your own droning vocally, which we did earlier in the course when we were discussing chakras. We were toning on different vowels. Those can be very effective too. Your voice is the most healing instrument of all. When you are chanting or droning on a tone yourself, you are using the most powerful healing instrument of all, your own voice. Bagpipes, there's another instrument. that we're very familiar with. Here's a little selection of a lament from my CD Drone Zone, where you will hear a piper, a man playing the Scottish small pipes, which are not quite the same as the Highland pipes, but they too have a drone, and he will begin with a lament. Later, you will hear the flute join with the pipe sound or the bagpipe sound. And last, but certainly not least, we are blessed in these times to have an instrument called a synthesizer, where you can choose just about any timbre, any quality of sound to be your drone instrument. For example, I've got my synthesizer here set to Scotland, it's called. So all I have to do is hold a key down and I have a drone. So you can experiment. If you have a synthesizer at home, you can just do what I just did. Hold down a key. I happen to choose the G, and that's the tone that touches most of us in the throat. Say you have a throat problem. Press down the G, let it drone forever. Say eh above it. Make up a tune with using eh as the vowel, and it will go to your throat, and it'll help loosen things up. Also, while you're going through these things, it's nice to think about, why am I blocked in my throat? You might want to think about that. What is it I can't say? What is it I'm trying to create but can't create? You see that I'm going back to what the attributes are of the throat chakra and why it may be closed and why the throat area might be closed. So you might be doing that as you're making the sound, because the sound without the intent is not as powerful as it is with intent and with consciousness. In allopathic modern medicine, there are particular medical machines that help break down blockage through the use of drone. The first one that comes to mind is the lithotripter. And the lithotripter is a machine that breaks down kidney stones, from the Greek word litho, meaning stone. And what happens here is the patient is laid in a kind of a tub of water, and a belt goes across the kidney area. And explosions of sound are played through the belt. The water makes it a much more gentle and less invasive procedure. And within those explosions of sound is the same sound that is the frequency of the mass that needs to be broken down. Again, if you duplicate the frequency of the mass, you can shatter it. And this is precisely what happens with a lithotripter. The explosion of sound contains the same frequency as the blockage or the kidney stone. The kidney stone is shattered and passes naturally. This still seems a bit invasive, but it is a modern machine that is using tone and sound to break down blockage. Every musical sound has a certain number of vibrations per second. The lowest sounds, such as this low sound that I'll play on the synthesizer, vibrate at a much slower level than the same sound several octaves above. The number of vibrations per second in the low sound is 1/4 the number of vibrations used in this sound 4 octaves above. So the lower the pitch, the slower the vibration. The higher the pitch, the faster the vibration. When we're working with vibrations for mass and density in the body, the larger the mass, the slower the vibration. The smaller the mass, the faster the vibration. So that little bubble in my ear had a very high vibration. Though my belly, to get things moving again, I would need a much lower pitch than I would need to move a little bit of water in my ear. So here we're working with frequency, or how fast something moves, how frequent the vibration is, frequency, and mass. Now, as far as vocal drones, we might try a few of them now. It doesn't matter what pitch you're doing it on. And I talk about pitch a lot. I mean what note, what tone. I'd just like you to be aware of the different sound of each vowel and perhaps try to isolate where you feel it in your body. When I talk about the different sound of each vowel, in music we would call that timbre. For example, why does the oboe sound like an oboe? Why doesn't it sound like a flute? The flute and the oboe have a very different quality of sound, and that's timbre. And we'll come up with this later as we talk about the instruments more specifically. So the timbre of sound is changed by the vowel you choose to use. For example, let's go through the list again. Remember, oo, o, ah, ah, I. Put them together, they spell the word why. So let's listen to the difference if I stay on the same pitch of the timbre of each vowel. The first vowel, oo, oo. The second vowel, o, the third vowel, aw, or A-W. Aw. The fourth vowel, A-H, ah. Ah. The fifth vowel, eh. The sixth vowel, I. And the seventh vowel, E. A nice nose rattling E. E. Notice how each timbre, or the sound of each vowel, changes the character of the tone. Each one of those tones can be of use. Try each one of them. If you know you have a blockage or you have a pain somewhere, experiment. Try the oo. Does it work there? Does it help relieve the pain? Try the o. Does that work better than the oo? Or try the e. I find that the o and the oo tend to work in the lower part of the body better, but some people find that they work in the head as well. So you can try the different vowels and where they touch you, and if you know that you have a blockage somewhere and you're using the sound along with intent, that very important word that you'll hear over and over again in this course, if you're using that with the intent, it will help break down the blockage. And it doesn't matter particularly which pitch you sing it on, just the fact that you are using the sound. Now, my partner has MS, and very often she gets constipated. So she'll stand back to me, and I will make a sound at her kidney area. It never fails. It never fails. And that's kind of a sound. All of these different vowels, all of these different sounds have different effects. And you have to experiment with them. I can't say to you, this one's going to work for you and this one's going to work for you. You have to decide which one's going to work the best for yourself by experimenting. And I know it's scary because we're very repressed. Making sounds like this, it's like really weird, but it works. If you went to a chiropractor's office or an alternative healer's office and they brought out a machine that did something like this, made this really weird sound, they aimed it at your body, you say, hey, cool machine. But if a human being does it to you, you think it's a little weird. Well, this is what I think it's very important we get back to. We have all of this in our own bodies. We have all the healing potential we need in our own voices. And this is why I call this the curative power of the voice. You can hear that the vocal tones that I'm using are quite nasal and quite loud. I really believe that the more penetrating the sound, the more mass can be accessed. In other words, if you're making a penetrating sound, you're going to penetrate mass. However, I have also heard healers that don't use as penetrating a sound as I do. They use a much softer sound. Again, we go back to the formula. Sound plus intent equals healing. So it may not be that everyone needs to use such a penetrating sound, but I have found that this works for me. Again, experiment. See what works for you. To hold these long drones, doing them vocally, can be pretty challenging. So I want to give you a breathing technique. And this was taught to me by my teacher, Samuel Barron. I'm a flutist, and I studied with him, and he learned it from a book he picked up in a bus station called The Science of Breath by Yogi Ramacharaka. And you have to stand up for this one, but you could still try it if you're driving in the car. Maybe you'll want to try it when you get home if you are driving now. Pretend you're a balloon. Get rid of all of your air. Get rid of it. Push it out. Empty it. Pull your belly in. You've gotten rid of all your air. There's no air in there. Now, take a quick gasp of air and push your belly out. And now fill your chest. And now with the last bit of energy, fill your throat. You have taken a full breath. All right. Now, pretend you have a pillow feather in front of your mouth. You're going to take the same breath, and your object, once you get the breath, is to keep that pillow feather in front of your mouth. If you blow too hard, the pillow feather is going to go up into the air. If you don't blow hard enough, it's going to spiral down to the floor. So image that imaginary pillow feather in front of your mouth, and let's start that breath technique again. Notice your shoulders, though. Your shoulders should not go up. It's not your shoulders that are being filled, it's your chest, actually your belly, all the way up through your throat. So here we go again. Empty yourself totally of air and pull your belly in. You are a deflated balloon. Now with a very quick gasp, pull it in and throw your belly out. Now your chest, fill it. Now your throat, fill your throat. Now, slowly seeing that imaginary pillow feather in front of your mouth, see how long you can hold it there so it doesn't go up or down. You could sing the tone. That's called taking a full breath. And if you practice that religiously every day, you will find that your breath capacity will triple. I promise you. It did for me in my flute playing, and then I found out that I could swim underwater the full length of a 25-meter pool on one breath, just by knowing that technique. So that will help you keep your drone tones nice and long. This moves us right into toning. And toning is a technique that's probably very, very ancient. But it started to be revived around the 1980s when a lot of body workers all of a sudden found that as they were working with people's bodies, sounds were coming up through them naturally. And so this began to be called toning. You probably have toned and not even thought that's what you were doing. If you've hurt yourself and groaned, you've been toning. Every time you are hurt, it's important that you make a sound. And that doesn't mean just physically hurt, but emotionally as well. Because if you don't make the sound will crystallize and be held in the tissue as memory, as unexpressed memory. A few years ago, I was going out to the woodpile. I live in Maine. And I was going out to the woodpile, and believe me, in Maine you need about 10 cords of wood to get through the winter. So the woodpile was very high. And a piece of oak fell on end on my big toe, which would teach me not to wear moccasins when going out to get wood. But I did, and I knew immediately that my toe had been crushed, broken. And I knew immediately that they don't set toes, so I was going to have to do something about it. So I said to my partner, I have just broken my toe. I am going to have to groan for a while, probably a few days. I want to warn you in advance. So I lay down on the couch. I got a poultice of comfrey. I like to use herbs, put it on the toe, and groaned for 3 days. Well, that's all I needed. I mean, it felt great to groan. Women who've given birth to children will tell you, you can't hold back that birth cry. There's no way you can hold that back. It has to come out. Unless you're drugged up, and that can't be healthy. You have got to make the sounds when you are hurt. Otherwise, they're going to stay in your body. And when they stay in your body, they're going to crystallize in the tissue, and you're not going to be able to release it until that sound is made. So that toning is coming back is wonderful. But again, it's kind of scary for those of us who live in a very repressed society where we're not allowed to make sounds, especially men are told not to cry. And this is horrible. When you are hurt, you've got to cry. The first time I was toned was in about 1980. I had just given a concert in Chicago. And very often after I give a concert, people will come up afterwards and say, I'm a body worker, I'd love to give you a massage. And sometimes I'll let them and sometimes I won't. It depends on how I feel about them. Or as musicians say, it depends on their vibes. Well, this woman came up to me and said, I'd really like to give you some body work. I'd like to give you a massage. I'm highly trained. And she recounted all her training. And she said, but, I do something else. I make sounds as well. Well, this is the first time I'd heard of anything like this. So I was intrigued. And I said, okay, I'd be very interested. So the next day I went to her house. And she had the massage table in a large room with a very high ceiling. The room was plaster, which is very good acoustically. It had a wooden floor, again, very good acoustically. It was over a basement, which meant that the floor was like a sounding board. And that's all that was in the room. And I laid down on the table. And I had a toning session that was quite unbelievable. She barely even touched my body, barely gave me massage with the fingers or the hands. What she did was sound the painful sounds I was not able to make when I got hurt as a child. Many of us have had abusive parents who say, shut up, kid, don't cry. Or especially boys. Boys aren't supposed to cry. Boys are supposed to be real stoic and handle it like a man. Well, this is destructive. So what she did was she sounded the trauma that I had had as far back as being a baby through childhood when she got to different areas because she could hear the sound in the tissue. She could hear it contained there. And ideally, she told me, and her name was Vicky Dodd, she could hear the sounds that I had held onto and had not released at the time I received whatever pain it was. And she sounded that sound. I thought it was pretty weird. But as she made the sound, after she made the painful sound, she walked back from it and started chanting overtones or harmonics, which we will explore very soon. But she was chanting these sounds with vowels. I'll put it that way. Sounds with vowels. And then when she was farther back, she started to hum. The humming was the sound that a good mother would make while holding a baby to her breast and rocking in a chair. Just a hum sound. And she said that this sound calmed the nervous system. So in her technique of toning, she used 3 classes of sound, of vocal sound. The first, releasing the pain itself by duplicating the sound that was not able to be uttered at the time, chanting on vowels in order to get overtones, and then calming the nervous system with the hum. Ideally, she would hope that the person on the table would do it so she wouldn't have to do it. But as I've said several times, we do live in a kind of repressive time where it's very difficult to make weird sounds for fear of being thought of as weird. So groaning is important. Groaning is a very natural sound. It grows into what is called toning. And toning is merely taking a drone sound, a groan sound, and letting it release whatever pain is happening. Several years ago, I was teaching a workshop at Omega Institute on the East Coast, a very large workshop. And as an example of a natural wailing sound, I used a selection by Paul Winter called Wolf Eyes. I'll play a little of it for you now. We had been doing a lot of toning in the morning, and one man had been very bothered by the toning that we had done. It had stirred him up, and he was very upset with it. And when this particular recording was played, he just totally broke down and just let it all out. And it really was wonderful to see. I'm sure it was very hard for him. But the toning that had happened in the morning had started the process, and this wonderful wailing wolf sound that Paul Winter took and incorporated into his saxophone solo was enough to open this guy up, to let it all out. So this kind of work doesn't just have to be done with your own voice. It doesn't have to be done with you lying on a massage table being toned. There are recordings that can help this come out, and you can find it. Blues is another way. Listening to the blues, because the whole function of the blues is to wail and to let it hang out. Just let the sadness out. It starts at the top and it falls. Let the wail happen. Let the groans happen. Besides the blues scale and doing a downward wailing motion, just as the wolf did, just as Winter did on his saxophone. There's also a form of music called the lament or the keening, and this is specifically to let grief out. Here's an example of Irish keening. It's called a keening song, and you'll also notice that this particular one has a drone as the bass. And so listening to blues or listening to keening or listening to laments that are already recorded can be very healing if you don't feel that you can do it vocally. But I'd like to spend the rest of the time on how you can do these sounds vocally and how they touch us and where they touch us.
This concludes Session 3. Please turn the tape over for Session 4.